Hello. Today I want to talk about a subject that is not really covered by the media, which is rarely covered by the media. It's about the, well, first of all, the illegal occupation of Gaza and parts of the West Bank by the so-called Pseudo-Palestinians. Let us explain that the propaganda that these Arabs give is that the evil Jews arrived there in 1948 and they took their land. Of course, that's a lie, it's a perfect lie. Everyone knows that the Jews were there thousands of years before the Arabs arrived. And most of these pseudo-Palestinians were actually brought in by the Turks in the late 19th and the early 20th century. And in 1948 there were 600,000 Jews, 130,000 Christians, who were also Jews, because Christianity is Judaism, and there were 1,100,000 Muslims. So the figures were quite close in 1948. And Gaza was illegally held by the Egyptian army for 19 years, 1948 and 1967, and the West Bank was illegally controlled by Jordan, 1948 to 1967. No one talked about that, of course. And then the land was freed by the Jews in the summer of 1967 in the Six-Day War. And in 2005, this anti-Zionist politician called Ariel Sharon gave, for absolutely no reason, he gave Gaza to the Pseudo-Palestinian Arabs, who have absolutely no rights there. And shortly after, in 1993, the traitor Yitzhak Rabin and Shimon Peres, they gave parts of the West Bank to the Pseudo-Palestinian Nazis, for absolutely no reason. Parts of Ramlech, parts of Bethlehem, and parts of Jericho, parts of Hebron, were given to the Arab illegal immigrants who claim to be indigenous, who claim to be victims. Of course, we can prove that that's all a lie. And so Gaza was free. From 2005 onwards, Gaza is a free city, and it was taken over by an Islamic militant group called Hamas. And Hamas killed its fellow Palestinian Muslims, members of the Fatah, members of Hamas itself, and what is today's subject is actually what Hamas does to the Christians in the Gaza Strip, and we're also going to talk about what happened to the Christians in the West Bank by Fatah. And Fatah claims to be more mild than Hamas is. And of course that's a lie, and we will explain exactly how. So here's a little article I picked up from the internet, and it gives us a rough example of what happens to the Christians there. So there's this guy called Yusuf Guri. He's a Christian who fled from the religious persecution in Gaza. Hamas men tried to capture him twice. His sister is under pressure to wear a headscarf. As Muslim religiosity intensifies in Gaza, Christians feel more under siege. Within a year of Gaza's takeover by Hamas, 2006, the owner of a Gaza-only Christian bookstore was abducted and murdered. Now, who knows about this? I mean, the guy owns a bookstore with a Bible in it, and he gets killed for it. Christian stores and schools were firebombed. Like most of his friends, Mr. Guri had enough. He went to Judea-Samaria, that's the West Bank. He studies theology in Bethlehem Bible College. Now, the Western media usually ignores the plight of the Christians in the West Bank and in Gaza. They denounce Israel's security border. However, until Arab terrorists turned Bethlehem into a safe haven for suicide bombers, Bethlehemites were free to enter Israel, just as many Israelis routinely visit Bethlehem. Now, Israel's security barrier helped restore security in Israel and the West Bank. Pilgrims and tourists have returned to Bethlehem's church of nativity. That PA, that's Fatah, PA is the PLO, it's Fatah, terrorists, had defiled in 2002. Now the article doesn't really go into details of what happened to the church of nativity in Bethlehem, but I'll explain immediately afterwards. In Bethlehem too, life is difficult for Christians. Kouhi said that Muslims, that's the Fatah Muslims, who are supposed to be mild as opposed to the more belligerent Hamas, supposedly. Guru says that Muslims stand in front of the college to intimidate the students by the way they read the Quran. Other Muslims place their prayer rugs in a manger square, and they do it purposely. The college dean will not explain why. He said that the Muslims and Christians live in relative harmony, but admitted that Christians feel the pressure of Islam. The head of the Christian TV station denied any Christian suffering, but then described land theft, beating, intimidation by a Muslim and his own house, firebombing. Muslim gangs seize Christian-owned land as PA security forces stand by. So that means that Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, his successor in the West Bank, turn a blind eye. Well, if they did not actually order these attacks, they turn a blind eye to them. Always a minority religion, predominantly Muslim Palestinians, Christians are fleeing. When Muslim armies conquered the region, that's in the 7th century AD, Christians were the majority, of course, and so were the Jews. So one hears claims that Israel is compelling Christians to flee. No facts are adduced to explain why would-be Christians. Truth is, Muslims are compelling Christian exodus, as they have from other states in our time, particularly in Lebanon. Some other pressure is official. When the pressure is individual, PA authorities condone it. Now also, so getting back to what happened in 2002, members of Fatah, they seized the Church of Nativity. Now the Church of Nativity is a large Byzantine church. It's full of mosaics and columns. It was built by Constantine the Great. It was built by Justinian later on. So we're talking about early Byzantine, early Christian. It's a pilgrimage site for all Christians. It was seized by Fatah. Who knows about this? No one knows about it. And over 200 Christian tourists were held there as hostages at gunpoint. They placed bombs in the church, and of course the IDF burst in and then they rescued the terrorists, the tourists. They killed a few of the Pseudo-Palestinian terrorists. They took out the bombs, and some 30 terrorists, they're not even in jail. They're under surveillance only. So they're free, but they're under surveillance. Now let's talk about another guy. There's another guy called Majed El-Safi. He's the founder of the One Free World International, a Canadian-based human rights group. Now shortly after Hamas seized control of the Gaza Strip in a violent coup in June 2007, El-Shafi said his group received reports of two kinds of violations. First one, that Hamas was torturing the members of Fatah in Gaza. So like I said, they killed each other. They killed each other. And El-Shafi reported this in the CBN News. The second one was that Hamas was going to the graveyards of the Christians, picking up the dead bodies of Christians, throwing them and burning them and saying, you cannot bury your dead bodies here because it's our land, it's a holy land, and by burying your Christian families here, you are desecrating the land. So, we're talking about Gaza, a Jewish city which is illegally occupied by Muslim terrorists. And they claim that not only Jews are not allowed to live in their city, and that the Christians are defiling it, and they're overturning tombs. Now, isn't that disgusting? Overturning a tomb. Who knows about this? No one does. Who cares? No one cares. Oh, and the Pseudo-Palestinians are pretending to be the victims. They're pretending to be indigenous. And of course, all that is paid for by Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the petroleum dollars. And it's all a big play. And the pawns are the Pseudo-Palestinians who are trying to hurt Israel. The people who move the pawns are, of course, Saudi Arabia and Qatar. El-Shafi said that his group has also received reports about Christian families being forced to cooperate with Hamas, or the children or their wives will get raped or will be persecuted. So they were forced to cooperate with Hamas to protect their families, he said. And there's an estimated 3,500 Christians living amidst some 1.5 million Muslims in the Gaza Strip. The tiny Christian communities had hoped for some protection from Hamas when it came to power, but Christian and Western targets have come under repeated attacks in the last few years, allegedly from Islamic fundamentalist groups. 2 years ago, a Palestinian Christian who worked for the Bible Society was kidnapped and murdered, reportedly for refusing to convert to Islam. According to El-Shafi, the situation of the Christians in the West Bank, with the Palestinian Authority as in control, that's parts of the West Bank that were given to the Pseudo-Palestinian Nazis, according to the Oslo Accords in 1993. It's supposed to be better. Now, the PA wants support from the West, so the leaders try to portray themselves as a democratic country. But El-Shafi pointed to Bethlehem, the city of Jesus' birth, where there had been a steady exodus of the Christian community for decades. Bethlehem has become a tourist zone for the PA. Basically, they don't want the Christians there, but they want the Christian tourists to come in and take their money. Now, El-Shafi is well acquainted with persecution. Raised in a prominent Egyptian Muslim family, El-Shafi became a Christian at 18. He was arrested and tortured and sentenced to death for his faith. He escaped and fled to Israel. So, a person who was persecuted by Islamic fundamentalists flees to Israel. Where else? Is he going to go to Hamas? Or perhaps Persia? Or the Saudi king? Of course he's going to go to Israel. They're the only ones who work for Christianity. But of course, the Saudis want to represent as the Jews as the evil persons who are persecuting the Pseudo-Palestinians, who are supposed to be indigenous, and they're supposed to be victims. So the Jews helped El-Shafi by international organizations to immigrate to Canada. He says the future of the Christians in the Muslim world is up to the Christians in the West. From the beginning of the Holocaust until all the way to Darfur, all this did not happen just because the people are doing evil. It's because the people that sit around and do nothing to stop it. He said Christians should pray every day for the persecuted church as well as take action by going to the congressman to raise the issue. Despite the persecution, El-Shafi said the Christians are still victorious, and he hopes that he will get some divine help, this El-Shafi guy. Now, there's also the case of the son of Hamas, who was a famous pseudo-Palestinian, who was arrested by the Jews. He was released, he was given a job, he was given an education, and he was converted to Christianity by this English taxi driver. And of course, he was denounced by his father. There were attempts made upon his life, and now he lives in America, this guy, the son of Hamas. And there's another pseudo-Palestinian who converted to Judaism, and he's also trying to kill him, these Muslim guys. And there's also reports of persecuting a Arab Christian priest in Nazareth. And Nazareth is in Israel proper. It's not in the West. It's not in the West Bank. So we've got the other Muslims over there who are also being bribed by Saudi Arabia or Persia, perhaps. And there's also the case of Christian Arabs affiliating with Israel because they know that they're going to get protection from the other, and they're going to be persecuted by the pseudo-Palestinians. And also, the pseudo-Palestinian Nazis, when they formed the PA in 1993 with the Oslo Accords, they chose Ramlech for their headquarters. And actually, the Nazi Yasser Arafat, this pseudo-Palestinian Nazi who has absolutely nothing to do with the land of Israel and Gaza and the West Bank, he had his headquarters in Ramleh. Now, in Ramleh, the Arabs, they defeated a big Christian army of Franks with St. Gilles there. So so by choosing that site as their capital, the pseudo-Palestinians are actually raising Islam to heights, and they are insulting the Christians for the big defeat, the defeat of St. Gilles, the Frank. And also, let's not forget that the Pseudo-Palestinians have destroyed synagogues in Gaza, where the Jews left in 2005. They have placed mosques on top of the citadel of King David, the Arabite, the Kotel, on top of that, and they built 2 illegal mosques. And let's not forget that the citadel of David, the Kotel, the Arabite, is the birth of Christianity. If you're not, I mean, it's the center of Christianity. Jerusalem is the center of Christianity. It's the center of Judaism also. Now, by building 2 illegal mosques on top of the citadel of David, what are you doing? You're not only desecrating Judaism, you're also desecrating Christianity. Now, the thing is that the Pseudo-Palestinians in Gaza and the West Bank are getting support by all these leftist groups, and they're also getting support by the Nazi groups also. And let's not forget that Golden Dawn in Greece in 2009, they had a march in the Constitution Square in the center of Athens, and they were supporting Hamas, an Islamic group. It was supporting Islam instead of Judaism. So they're not even nationalists, they're supporting Islam. And of course, the Pseudo-Palestinians have nothing to do with the land of Gaza, Israel proper, the West Bank, or the Golan Heights. Most of them were brought there by the Turks in the late 19th, early 20th century. They were actually very few in number, actually. And let's not forget that the Pseudo-Palestinians are also being persecuted in other places. They committed horrible crimes in other places too, including Lebanon, including Jordan, including Syria. And no one talks about that. They're the darlings of the left-wing media and the Nazis. And the propaganda works well. I mean, some people are actually convinced that the Pseudo-Palestinians have something to do with the West Bank or Gaza, and they are actually victims. And in 1948, the Jews came out of nowhere and they took a land that belonged to Arabs. That's what the propaganda states, that they were there and the Jews took their land. Of course, that's a big lie. And we will work on that and on the rest of the videos I will release. We'll explain how this propaganda works, how it was created, how it is paid by, and how it goes on, and how it has supporters in the West, including supporters. I mean, including Carter, Jimmy Carter, the guy who sells peanuts, the guy who owns the peanut farms. Jimmy Carter. So Jimmy Carter, instead of supporting Christians, he supports the Islamo-Nazis. Why? Does he hope to get some free oil from Saudi Arabia or Qatar? And there are other leftist groups. There's George Galloway, there's Norman Finkelstein, there's David Icke, the guy with the aliens. He talks to aliens, this guy. And so there are a lot of wackos who are actually saying silly things. There are other people who are being paid to say silly things, and they're doing it on purpose. So Islam is spreading to the West, and the Soviet-style propaganda is working quite well. I mean, it's amazing how it works. And it all goes back to the 7th century BC. So like we said, the majority of the people, in fact all the people there were Christians. It was part of the Byzantine Empire, the Eastern Roman Empire, which split from the western part of the Roman Empire. But all the Middle East was part of it. So what is today? Iraq, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Egypt, Northern Africa was part of the Eastern Roman Empire, and it was taken by the Muslims in the 7th century AD. So what did the Muslims do to the Christians? The Roman troops in Gaza, they were the first martyrs, they were killed. What happened to the Byzantine Eastern Roman troops at Yarmouk by the Jordan River? They were massacred, 30,000 of them. What happened to cities like Damascus or Hama or Aleppo or you name it, Philadelphia, Rabat Amman, Alexandria in Egypt, Cairo, what later became Cairo. All these were Christian cities. And these people were massacred, they were forced to become part of Islam. And of course there were still Christians living there. I mean, there are the Maronites in Lebanon, Christians in Syria, Armenians, Copts in Egypt, and all these people are being persecuted. And no one talks about this. And particularly, no one talks about those in Gaza and the West Bank, because the pseudo-Palestinian Nazis who live in Gaza and the West Bank are pretending to be the victims, and they're pretending to be indigenous, and then trying to portray the Jews as people who took their land. So that's the propaganda. And of course all that is a big lie. And of course they have not paid any compensation for what they did in the 7th century AD, for the massacring of Christians and Jews. They haven't paid anything for that. For desecrating churches, Christian churches, Christian temples, destroying icons, even taking the Holy Cross. Well, with the Crusades also. The Crusaders were eventually beaten off after 200 years. I mean, they freed the land for like 200 years, and eventually they were driven out too. So millions of Crusaders lost their lives to that faith too. And no one talks about that. So we'll talk about the pseudo-Palestinian propaganda in the next video we'll receive, and how it is funded. We'll explain how it is funded and how it works actually, and how it has supporters in the West, leftists and Nazis as well.